Hello all, my name is Annie Bradley and this is my Module 7 Final Ignite project. And within the formative assessment, I chose to really look at the third strategy, which was feedback. So just to review the 7 strategies we learned this semester, the first one is clear and understandable learning targets. Number 2 is models and examples of strong and weak work. And the third is to offer regular feedback, descriptive feedback. Teach students to self-assess and set goals, use evidence to plan instruction, focused revision, and then engage them in their self-reflection and allow them to keep track and share their learning with other students. So my thesis for this project was actually taken from the book. So formative assessment does make a difference, and it is the quality, not just the quantity of feedback that merits our closest attention. So really looking at the quality of feedback we're giving our students. So the first thing that I'm looking at is how we can direct our attention to the intended learning. So successful feedback is what is done correctly when you're giving students good things. Intervention feedback is the improvements you want to see. So you want to make sure you're always referencing a strength to be with the students. So an example of this is, here's an example of the success feedback. I like the way you're doing something, and here's an example of intervention feedback. Do not include this. They could have gave a positive with their intervention feedback. Second, we're looking at when it occurs during learning. So you want to deliver it when the students have time to act on it. Allow them to see mistakes that further their learning and really promote that growth mindset in your room. So a good way to do this would be to hang growth mindset posters in your room. So tell students it's okay for them to make mistakes, and that's how we learn. I would really harp on this in your classroom so that students know it's okay to learn from those mistakes. So you also want to address partial understanding. So corrective feedback can be ignored if the students are lost in the content. If you're giving the same feedback repeatedly, that might mean you need to go back and reteach something for the whole class. And it's not always appropriate to deliver it during instructional time. So this is an example to students' work. So you can see which sample shows partial understanding, which is struggling, which would benefit from feedback, and which needs further instruction. So you can really look at those and identify them. So you don't want to do the thinking for the student. Don't offer them too much help, and before offering help, see if they can do it on their own. You might want to point out the errors, but ask them to think how to correct it before you say, this is what you should do. So an example of this that they give in the book is post a list of conventions for writing that students have learned. This way they know they're held accountable for those because you already learned them together, and they can use that poster then as a reference. Limit correctives to what students act on. So does the student know what to do with corrective information? Give them the proper amount of feedback per student and limit the focus of the feedback. You don't want to give them way too much that they get overwhelmed and frustrated and just shut down. So some suggestions for giving this would be picture of symbol cues. So this teacher had stars and stairs. And as you can see, they utilized this. The students knew what they meant, and then she could just draw those symbols instead of writing. Really easy way. Another one would be assessment dialogue. So actually starting a dialogue with the students. This is something that they can fill out, and then when you're brought together, you can talk about it. So they both are looking at strengths and then weaknesses, things they want to work on, and how they're going to move forward from there. More suggestions would be 2-color highlighting. So they talked about doing 2-color highlighting and 3-minute conferences, written comments, and codes. So one of the big ones was codes, just like I talked about, like the symbols. It's very similar. Peer feedback is also really beneficial. In the book it said it's beneficial for all students, and it also helps to narrow the achievement gaps between high achieving and low achieving students. Peer feedback conferencing, you want to practice this in a controlled setting. Don't just let your students go off and try to do it because they may not do it properly. Allow them to attempt to solve individually first, like I discussed before, and it really said in the book that struggling learners really benefit from this. You can also do peer response groups. Tell students why they are receiving feedback, and here's a feedback sheet from the book that I took just as an example. It says the feedback requested and then response, and the date, the author, and the title. And just to kind of conclude, teaching students to see their work as opportunities to improve is at the heart of learning. So feedback is vitally important, and I think that's really important to remember as we're teaching our students in the classroom.